when I joined the profession, tech transfer in the United States was still very significantly about the federally funded research that happened at the university created a certain amount of inventions per year, and those just happened. And then our job was really to try and do something with whatever those assets were, typically by filing a patent on them and then marketing those patents to industry and to venture capital. And then if we got a nibble, we would go pursue it. My former boss in the field, great guy, used to describe it as we're farming someone else's orchard. Like, we didn't plant the trees. We don't have any say in how many trees there are, but whatever fruit falls off the trees, our job is to go make some interesting pies out of them. And I think that was pretty much how it felt until maybe about 10 years ago. And at least in the US, I think there were a number of trends that really had nothing to do with the internal workings of the university. They were exogenous trends. But in New York, for instance, Mayor Bloomberg, Mike Bloomberg, became mayor of New York and really decided to make a concerted effort to make New York City a startup capital, like an entrepreneurship capital, in the same way it was a financial capital and a media capital, an insurance capital. And that was both in tech startups and also in biotech startups. And so the city government started to put a lot of investments in place to create the kind of ecosystems that you'd want to see. There started to be more incubators and accelerators, and also started to engage with the universities around how do we make this process easier, more transparent, more reasonable, and trying to get more startups out the door. I think the same thing started to happen with the mayors and the governors across the United States, and in particular under the Obama administration at the federal level as well. And you can see the outcomes of those now with the National Science Foundation and the National Institute for Health. In their funding policies, there are often questions about what is your regional innovation ecosystem? What is your plan to commercialize the assets? So there was pressure from without. And then I also think, certainly at Columbia, but at many of our peers, there was increasingly pressure to help the university feel relevant. There was a sense, and President Bollinger talks about this as being the fourth purpose, that there used to be three primary purposes of the university: to educate the next generation of leaders, to push the boundaries of knowledge, and to engage with our local community. And increasingly, with the fourth purpose that President Bollinger talks about, the fourth purpose is making sure that these innovations and people emerging from the university make a difference in solving the world's biggest problems. And if you're going to do that, it takes you out of that comfort zone of just kind of marketing stuff and seeing what happens, to really trying to, how do you get more inventions out of the lab? How do you create interactions between faculty that don't normally work together, both within the university and outside the university? What can we collaborate with our peers in New York City, in New York State, across the country, to create ecosystems, to create venture capital channels, to create mentoring opportunities, to connect venture backable entrepreneurs to the right startups? It really upped our game. And so I think part of that is the reason why we went from 5 to 27 startups a year.
Yeah, I mean, the revolution really started in the UK about the year 2000. And we were basically then tasked with government that this was to become an important part of national policy, to make sure that, I like the orchard analogy, we just say we're a post-processor on research. We don't get involved with the research, but we look at what comes out of it and make sure that where there are opportunities, they are actually realized for the benefit of society and the economy. And when we started out, I have to say, it was a daunting task. And one of the things we benefited from enormously was the input from a whole range of US colleagues. And the big thing that that's allowed us to do over the past 20 years is really to train people. So we actually have now a profession. People are trained for whom they can see this as a career rather than a 3-year sort of project, after which 2.5 years, they move on to their next job. So that's been one of the big changes. The consequences of that, I think, have been seen by the universities. You may remember in 2008, we had a big financial crash, and the UK government had a big sort of spending review, and they cut back most of their departments by at least 25% on their budget. But because this was seen as important and we were getting results, the government actually said, we're not going to increase your budget, but we're not going to cut it for research and for translation. And they have continued to put more and more money into it on the back of this. With that, I mean, I think there is an evolution going on around the world, which is, and it's seeing it in the US as well, which is this is becoming more and more a central agenda item for government. And with that comes a lot more sort of scrutiny and accountability and questioning. It's very difficult for a politician to put money into something and then not be able to have the data to show that it's successful. Right. The other thing which I think has really changed is we've started, and this is something which sort of the US hasn't done in general, we've started to actually generate university funds to actually get the spin-outs going. Universities in the UK collectively have now 1.4 billion pounds, so whatever that is in euros, probably about 1.5 billion euros in their investment funds to seed fund getting things out the door. And those places, I'm doing a meeting workshop with the minister tomorrow, and the data just coming out of that is that of those universities that have put those funds in place, they've quadrupled their spin-out rate. That was true in Cambridge, in Oxford, in the Northeast, in sort of where there's virtually no venture capital. Manchester, Leeds and Sheffield have just announced a first close of their fund with about 250 million euros going in from investors. And that really is changing the dynamics, because for the first time we think we're not in competition with Orin, but our companies can compete on a level playing field because they're getting the same sorts of seed funding levels that allow them to actually build the business rather than worry about cost control and where they're going to get the next month's funding from and all the rest. So I think that is really the thing which is starting to make a change, is much more sort of scrutiny and investment in what we're doing and the ability to support from the universities, because venture capital doesn't support it. If you look at MIT, who's investing in MIT spin-outs, it's a roll call of all the local venture capitals. If you look at University of Minnesota, it's University of Minnesota and a few angels. We're like Minnesota in the UK. Sort of, it's either the funds that we've created ourselves to be in control of our own destiny, or it's angel investors, or it's funds which are like IP Group, which are associated with universities. So lots of change, and I think we're going to see a lot more change still coming.
Yeah, Tony, it's interesting. Like when you mention because we run into this all over the time. I mean, I think, and even Christian earlier when he mentioned, did this happen because because you guys made it cheaper for startups? I think there's so many misconceptions about what these deal structures actually even are, and how they come together. So this misinformation can lead local governments or local university leaders or local faculty groups to always think the grass is greener somewhere else. Because, I hear this all the time of like, well, Stanford, at Stanford, it's only 5%. But not realizing there's still all of the other terms. I mean, the same at Columbia, we do offer 5% equity. But if you just hear the soundbite of 5% equity, that's one thing. The reality of it is that we and Stanford and most of our peer schools, it's roughly 5%, but with anti-dilution of that equity through the full Series A round, which is essentially equivalent to double-digit equity percentages that don't carry anti-dilution. And so, and also people hear about it like, well, it's an equity-only deal.
We had the wonderful piece of work by Stanford Law School, which showed that actually the royalty share on the license, it doesn't matter what the percentage is. It doesn't make any difference to the outcome. In terms of equity, we don't know. Does lower equity give you a better outcome? Because that's what we're after. We're after outcomes. It doesn't matter what the starting equity is really for us. It's after outcomes. But you want to optimize it. what little evidence there is says that actually university involvement is actually a great positive. So there's some Italian research which said that, which showed that those companies which had the largest share of equity owned by the university performed better in their markets than those that had lower shares. There's some French data, which the only one which actually followed the change of professors' privilege over the long term, rather than even the current studies in places like Norway, looked at it either side and haven't looked what happened since. But the French study again showed that actually the university equity ownership led to greater activity. What we're trying to do in the UK now is we've got actually a lot of universities have come in and we're diving down. You have to dive down to the individual deals to say what was the starting equity percentage, and then what was the subsequent downstream outcome in terms of were they able to raise capital and how much were they able to raise as a proxy for the much longer term success. And so it'd be interesting to see, because if that comes out as 5% is the best answer, we should all be doing it. If it says that it's there's no effect whatsoever, we shouldn't be sweating about it. But I think our problem is lack of evidence, and everyone has an opinion. Well, I think in the UK, when we first started 20 years ago, we were doing one spin out for every $5 million of research, and the US was doing one for every $50 million. We've now settled back to be level pegging with the US, about one spin out per $50 million of research. And I think that's the right number. We were creating lots and lots of small one-man companies that went nowhere. They had no support, they had no investment, nothing happened. And I think sort of my sense is there is a natural level. I don't know about Oren's views on that as well.
We take a royalty rate based on whatever comps we find in the databases. So we always get the royalty. There's no cap on the royalties. We don't do royalty buyouts. We'll offer that we'll discuss a royalty buyout in the future, but we won't ever agree to one based on a formula. We defer the past patent expenses for 24 to 48 months or until the company raises their A round, at which point it becomes due. So until the company is funding, we will defer the past patent expenses. Once they get their funding, it comes due. And the companies have to pay all the ongoing patent expenses. And then there's all the other things that are in there, like there's milestones based on successes, there's sub-licensing, and we take a percentage of sub-licensing income. I'm happy to share our template license agreement with any university that's listening to this, as well as the terms, and they can see exactly what we have. But the mythology around that grows that, you know, oh, universities in the US are giving things away for just 5% equity. And it's not true. I mean, University of Pennsylvania in the US, in their Upstart program, takes something like 50% equity in their startups, but it's fully diluted. At least is my understanding. So I'm fully dilutable. So, you know, they, in some of their startups, they'll take roughly 5% with anti-dilution. In other startups, they'll take half of the equity, but the only other party at the table is the founder. And so when the funding comes in, they all dilute together. And in the studies that I've seen, those two models end up being economically almost identical after the average A or B round. My main point was, I don't think the answer is just give everything away. I don't believe that would work. And I don't believe there's no evidence in the US that that is necessary. We do not give things away. We have reasonably structured deals. And I think it's the ecosystem that most European universities are trying to emulate. And then the second thing is that a good IP license alone is not sufficient. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. And so at Columbia, I have a slide I talk about where, you know, what does a great innovation need to get to the market? And yes, they need a reasonable IP license, but they also need to understand how to do customer discovery. They need entrepreneurship education. They need connections to mentors and advisors. They need access to validation stage capital, not much money, but just something to do some prototyping and see if the idea works. They need access to their early stage technical and business hires. They need connections to entrepreneurs that a VC will actually back, because sometimes the postdoc and the PhD student are not venture backable. And the faculty members almost never quit the university to go do this. And so who's going to actually run the company? They need good lawyers who understand how to structure these agreements in a way that sets them up for success. They need real estate, like cheap, flexible real estate to move into while they grow. And so what you see in a lot of the ecosystems in the US that are successful is it's not like just fixing the university IP licensing is not going to turn things around. You need to put all of these elements in place. Innovation and entrepreneurship and technology-based economic development are important to the university, and finding a variety of ways to send that signal, I think is critically important to the success. And that's got to come from university leadership. You can't expect the tech transfer office to do this all.
The outcome of this is the impact on society. And the one which struck me was when I was speaking to Kathy Koo. She said the whole of their success, fantastic success, created an income which was 4% of their total research budget and wasn't going to move the dial in university finances. But think of the value that Google, functional antibodies, Cohen-Boyer patents, Yahoo, Cisco have brought to the image of the university and its attraction of academics and research funding and all the rest. That's where the prize is. It's not in sort of nickel and diming the contract to get the best possible deal for yourself. It's actually doing what you can to get the best possible outcome at the end of the day. That's what we're here for.
Every university has a different local ecosystem. Every university has different elements that are there and different elements that need to be brought to the table. Some universities will have mountains of, Cambridge or Oxford have a large amount of money that everybody wants that money, but there is money that can be applied towards innovation and tech transfer. And other universities, public institutions, as we call them in the US, may not have the resources to do everything. They may not be able to put $100 million seed fund and hire 30 extra people and build a building. But there are cheap things you can do, and there are investment heavy things you can do. There's some things you can do quickly. There's some things that take time. But I think every university has tools at its disposal to make this work and at least start to make a difference. And if we all just kind of like dig in and cross our arms and say it's not my problem, it doesn't get solved. And it's great to see so many of us starting to work towards trying to make this a better environment for entrepreneurs.